Today's video is going to be a little bit more in depth, but we have uncovered another huge lie from the captain of the ACX crystal. Now, what you're seeing before you is, of course, this is the track of the crystal that has been reported by AIS. Now, we're going to go to the statement from the captain. The captain of the cargo ship that collided with the U.S. destroyer Fitzgerald earlier this month said in a report that the U.S. warship failed to respond to warning signals or take other evasive maneuvers. Or take other evasive maneuvers is going to be a little bit more important later, but we're going to get to the lie here pretty quick. The collision on early June 17 killed the 7 sailors that were still in their living quarters. The cargo vessel's skipper, Captain Ronald Avincula, submitted a report to the ship's owner. The captain's statement alleges that the container ship, the Philippine-flagged A6 Crystal, had signaled with flashing lights after the Fitzgerald suddenly steamed onto a course to cross its path. Now, we've covered the fact that the lie about the autopilot has now been shot out of the water. The lie about them being asleep has been shot out of the water, but here's the third one. After the Fitzgerald suddenly steamed onto a course to cross its path. Really? The Crystal steered hard to starboard to avoid the destroyer, but the Fitzgerald, 10 minutes later, and this is important as well, at 1:30, it hit the Fitzgerald 10 minutes after he started to turn to starboard. He says he hit him at 1:30. Now, I can prove right now in the track he's lying again. Okay, here's the track. Okay, now you have to remember something. He's transiting at 18.5 knots. Okay, here's another track here that shows that. He is moving at 18.5 knots prior to the accident. Okay, now this is the close-up track. This is the one that most people look at, but what they don't look at is this one. Okay, at 18.5 knots, 18.5 knots roughly translates into about 20 miles an hour. So what you are doing is you are transiting a mile about every 3 minutes. Okay, so over a 10-minute period, you would transit about 3 miles and some change. Now, this track shows at this point he turned toward the destroyer. Remember, he said that the Fitzgerald suddenly steamed onto his course. Wrong again. He's transiting here, and he makes a turn toward the track of the destroyer. And this isn't the only track that shows this. There's other ones out there that have been put out that show this. Here's another one that show this turn toward the destroyer. And oddly enough, we'll go back to our first one. When we look at this, if you do the timing and you do remember, from the point of the impact here at 1:30, all the way back here to 2:20, this entire inexplicable right-hand turn, this giant curve up here, all the way around here, represents 50 minutes of travel at much slower rates of speed because of the turning. So if this represents 50 minutes of travel, how far do you think this represents in time? Could it be 10 minutes? Looks like it to me, especially because of the increase in the speed. This guy's moving almost 19 knots. Here he's moving down around 14, 13, 12 knots. Down here he's all the way down to 8. So he lied. The Fitzgerald didn't turn into his path, didn't suddenly steam onto his path. His ship turned, and he said in his statement that he was on the bridge, that he saw the ship, that he flashed his lights at the ship, knew it was a destroyer. Now, also follow the logic with me on this. I'm going to get a tab a little closer here. You're here. You're on this collision course. You know you're on a collision course. Okay, now, regardless of your alleged efforts, you're here and then you're here. The only way you're here and then here is if your bow is facing this direction. So, you have a ship that's steaming this way, and you collide with it. Now, he said they didn't take any evasive maneuvers. That means the Fitzgerald wasn't trying to turn out of their way, but the Fitzgerald was transiting in a straight line. I don't care what angle you draw this at. If you impact him there, you're doing 18.5 knots, and let's assume he's doing at least, has been alleged that he was trying to beat him across his bow, so he's doing faster than 18 knots. That ship, that destroyer, would have ended up out here somewhere. It would not have ended up way back behind himself. It wouldn't have, there's no way the ship would have ended up behind where the impact took place. If what the Crystal's captain is saying occurred, the way he said it occurred. Now also remember this, the ship now, after the collision, is now pointing southward. Okay? And you, at the bridge of the ship, have the ability to look behind you. Okay, with no giant ship in front of you, the ship's going this way, you can look behind you and have a clear view of where that ship is, where it would be, and what it's doing. At that point, at the point of the collision, that's where you would have begun to slow your ship on a southward trajectory. Okay, and the slowing would have taken place down here. You wouldn't have made another left-hand turn and then gone all the way out here and then swung around and then transited to behind the point where you hit him, and then turned around here, sped up here, and then turned around here, then turned right here, and then turned left here, and then turned right again, and then turned right. You would not have done this. No reasonable person can believe that this captain would have piloted his ship in this manner. After a collision, it wouldn't have happened this way. There's no way, based on his now proven to be 3 separate lies that we can prove just by looking at the track. He turned toward the Fitzgerald. Lie number 1. Lie number 2, ship was not an autopilot. Lie number 3, okay, said he didn't know what he hit. Had to come back to find out that he hit the destroyer. 3 lies. The U.S. Navy is doing the very best they can to cover this up, but they can't control what's being said by the man who was in charge of the cargo ship. So there's one final place I want to go, and it's, I think, illustrative. It's called 20 Tanker Tips. Okay, and this is, now this talks about, it's the United States Power Squadrons. They're talking here about the shipping lanes in Santa Barbara, but some of the things apply. And I'm just going to read this to you, and you can read it if you want. It talks about how it can weigh as much as 250,000 metric tons. They can sometimes go as fast as 30 knots. And how long it talks here about how long it takes. And it says here, and this is something that a lot of people have come to the challenge said. In fact, these ships may require as much as 5 miles to stop with gears in full reverse. What that means is that they're saying as much as. That means at the maximum. Now, what we can ascertain from the track before is that he said he knew he was on a collision course with a U.S. Navy destroyer 10 minutes before at 18 knots. Okay, and we can say that he was transiting a mile every 3 minutes. So he's not as heavy as he could have been, but he was pretty heavy. Okay, and here it says, for example, a 500-foot, 8,000-ton ship needs over a third of a mile to turn around. This guy had 3 miles before the time that he said he had began to attempt to maneuver away from him and the time that he collided with him. You're saying in that amount of time, in that 3 miles that transited at 18.5 knots, 10 minutes, that he could not change the attitude or slow his ship? Because when we look at the track, one more time, when we look at the track, here, this is leading up to the accident, we do not see, based on these returns, any attempt to slow down. We don't see it. 10 minutes at 18 knots, 20 miles an hour is 3 miles. Okay, so he knew 3 miles ahead of the ship that he was on a collision course. Okay, now back to 20 tanker tips. Assume the big ships can't see you. Never play chicken. Okay, it's it's actually very helpful to understand the dynamics of what happened here. Now, but at the very end, and this has been talked about before, Item 20. Never, never, never place your vessel within 1,000 feet of a Navy warship. As a result of the events of 9/11, the Navy is authorized to use lethal force against any vessel coming within the prescribed safety zone without permission. You're telling me this tanker captain didn't know that? You're telling me this tanker captain was known to be, by his own words, on a collision course with a United States Navy destroyer. He didn't blow his horns. He didn't get on the radio and saying, hey, this guy's in front of me. I'm inside his area, his AO. He could shoot on me. He could sink me. He could do anything. Please, somebody contact this vessel. No, none of that. We don't get a call from the crew of the freighter until 2:20. And, strangely enough, 48 hours after the accident, after both ships were in port, the Navy spokesman said their understanding of the time of the collision was 2:20. Busted. 3 lies. None of it makes sense. It's a cover-up. You know it. I know it. Thank you very much. Like, share, subscribe.